Basic Brewing Radio is supported by the American Homebrewers Association, host of the 40th Annual HomebrewCon, coming up this June 28th in Portland, Oregon. The ultimate event for homebrewers, HomebrewCon offers 3 days of educational sessions and nightly events, as well as an expo hall that brings together every major homebrew supplier under one roof. Registration opens March 6th to members of the American Homebrewers Association. Not a member? Join the AHA today for access to HomebrewCon as well as other great benefits. Visit homebrewersassociation.org for more information. That's homebrewersassociation.org. Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, February 1st, 2018. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. This week, John Palmer, author of the recently revised How to Brew, joins us to talk about New England IPAs, or NEIPAs. For some of you, it's a listener's dilemma. You don't like NEIPAs, but you do like John Palmer. John gives us tips on brewing the controversial but growing style and tastes a beer that I brewed and sent to him. If you go to basicbrewing.com, you can find archives of our audio and video shows, our DVDs, brewers' logbooks, and other Basic Brewing gear. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Basic Brewing and find our show page on Facebook. See? We have a cool Basic Brewing app on iTunes and Amazon.com, and we're found all over the place where fine podcasts are served up. If you do us the favor of rating us on iTunes and maybe leaving a nice comment, they say that'll help new listeners to find us. If you want to support us financially, check out patreon.com/basicbrewing. I posted a video episode on Monday about my 15-minute small batch all-grain hop stand smash beer. That's the beer that I sent to John for tasting, by the way. It's a beer that I mashed traditionally and then only boiled for 15 minutes, adding some Cascade hops at the beginning of the 15-minute boil and then doing a hop stand at 180 degrees Fahrenheit or 82 C, and adding more Cascade at that time. I get into more of the details later in the conversation with John, but you can see that video now. It's out there on our podcast feed for Basic Brewing Video and our YouTube channel. I really like that beer. Grapefruit juicy, I'd say. And after my conversation with John, I was inspired to do another small batch experiment. This time, 1-gallon batches with 1 pound of dry malt extract and an ounce of Cascade hops in each. And I didn't boil. I just brought up the extract wort to a certain temperature, added an ounce of Cascade, and held it there for 20 minutes before chilling and pitching USO5. One batch was 200 degrees Fahrenheit, or 93 C, another 180 degrees Fahrenheit, or 82 C, and the third was 150 degrees Fahrenheit, or 65 C. Sort of like the experiment that Steve Wilkes, Casey Letillier, and I tasted a while back, where I hopped during the boil in 3 different batches at different times. So sort of simulating different temperatures that you would use maybe for a hop stand post-boil, or simulating what would happen to hops as they go through those temperature ranges as you just let the temperature fall off naturally. So I also brewed a full 5-gallon batch of beer where I put all the hops after the boil and let the temperature fall naturally for those 30 minutes instead of controlling the hop stand temperature as I usually do at a static temperature for 15 minutes. So I'm interested to see how that comes out. And when I do decide to control the hop stand temperature, it's easy because, I use my electric brew-in-a-bag system from our sponsors, Desiree and Dave, from High Gravity in Tulsa. After I posted the most recent video with the 2-gallon experiment with a 15-minute boil, a viewer commented on YouTube saying, "You didn't use your high-gravity system. I hope this doesn't mean you no longer love it, especially since I just ordered one." Well, of course I still love my high-gravity system with the Warthog controller. It's just too big to do those small batch experiments. But when it comes to doing 5 or 10-gallon batches, I wouldn't brew with anything else. I'm spoiled by the precision of control and the flexibility to experiment that I don't think I'd get with those other sort of all-in-one bread machine type systems. This system fits the way I've brewed for years. It just integrates with the way I do things. And high gravity has more configurations, not just brew in a bag. If you want to go for the more traditional 3-tier system, they've got those too. And they go all the way up to 2 barrels. Check out all of the electric systems that take the pain out of propane and the variety of Warthog controllers that they have at family-owned and operated highdgravitybrew.com. Tell them that we sent you to highdgravitybrew.com. Okay, it's always good to talk to John Palmer. If you don't have the recently updated version of How to Brew, you should pick it up. Lots of new stuff added in there. Well, John Palmer, welcome back to Basic Brewing Radio.
Oh, thank you very much, James. It's good to be here.
Well, it's always good to talk to you, John.
Yeah.
You contacted me with a question, which I was flabbergasted because I thought that you knew everything about beer. But you asked me a question about New England IPAs a while back, and of course I didn't know.
Well, you talk to so many people through your podcasts and at conferences and so on that I figured, hey, you maybe have some insight. So,
well, I did have some insight in that I referred you to Mike Tonsmeyer. And Ed Coffey from the Brewlosophy guys. And I'm not sure if you contacted them or not, but, at least I'm a conduit in that I don't know much myself, but I know people who know some. So,
right. There you go. Yeah. Yeah.
So this is a style. I said in a previous episode that this style, the New England IPA, or NEIPA, I guess as it's called now, this and pumpkin beers are two of the most pooped-on styles, I think, nowadays from,
Sure.
From all the styles out there. They're probably the most divisive styles. So
Yeah.
what did you learn? You're writing an article, right, on the style. What did you learn? Where are we? What's the state of the nation as far as New England IPAs are concerned?
Well, I guess although you could say that they're universally reviled as a style, it is here to stay, in my opinion. I mean, I travel a lot, around the country and around the world, and I've been down to South America twice in the past year, both to Peru and Brazil, and actually 3 times this past year. I went to Uruguay as well. And New England IPA is something that everybody is interested in. And, in some cases, South Americans are traveling to the States and they're trying Heady Topper and other classic New England style IPAs. And then they're trying to replicate them back home. But I'm also seeing an evolution of the style. And in that, whereas Heady Topper started out as a New England variation of a classic American IPA that is, high bitterness and lots of, late hopping that caused the haze that everybody tended to interpret as the signature of the style rather than, the flavor. We're seeing this style of ale coming down to lower gravities, kind of like you do in IPA in general. Where what the style guidelines draft suggests is like I think a 1060 to 1085 OG. Now you're routinely seeing interpretations or hazy hop forward ales like this at a gravity of anywhere from 1040 to 1060 as well. And more the mainstream kind of gravity. And again, the signature flavor of these beers is something that is evolving, I think, to something that's not quite as bitter, yet still features a very strong hop flavor and aroma. And it has this juicy character that people talk about where The body of the beer, the mouth of the beer isn't dry and crisp. It's, fruity and juicy and thirst quenching, and not quite as bitter. So I think it's a variation of IPA that really is evolving into its own style. And I think this is where a lot of the controversy or revilement, as to use my earlier word, comes from, is people saying, well, this isn't an IPA. You shouldn't call it an IPA. And okay, fine. Let's come up with another name. Hazy hop forward pale ales, or hop juice ales, or something like that. I don't know. But we really should probably get away from the IPA descriptor, because it's overused, and generally, I think these beers are evolving into a less bitter style than classic IPA.
Yeah, the first time I had, I believe the first time I had one of these was at Mike Tonsmeyer's house back in June of 2016, when we went up for the Homebrewers Conference in Baltimore. And what came out of his keg was a very hazy beer, very, the juicy and hoppy and delicious. And I would say, I say hazy because I would differentiate that from cloudy or milky, which is what a lot of these beers are looking like. If the pictures are accurate on social media and such, you have these beers that are being referred to as milkshake beers, or they're actually, they look like milk. So are these deviant from the style, or are these part of it?
I would say they're deviant, because I think you've probably heard some of the same rumors or gossip about the style, how people think they're being brewed. The haze, as I understand it, and as Gordon Strong talks about it in the draft BJCP guidelines, is it's a hop haze. It's a hop polyphenol protein haze. You do get some very milky interpretations where there's a lot of suspended yeast, and I remember pouring one of these, a beer that claimed to be in this style, from a can, where within minutes of pouring it, you had clear separation and settling of yeast and trub in the glass. It was a little ridiculous. People were thinking, okay, well, I got to add wheat flour or oats, or unmalted oats and various things to get starch haze. No, starch haze is clearly not part of the style, nor is yeast haze. You can brew the beer with a lower flocculating yeast to get the beer a little bit drier, But again, suspended yeast should not be the source of the haze. The haze comes from late hopping, where the hop polyphenols are not agglomerated and precipitated out with proteins as part of the hot break or cold break during the boil. That's where, and so with not boiling a substantial percentage of the hops, you get a lot of haze coming through in the beer.
Yeah, do you think that Gordon would mind if I read from this? You sent me the draft.
Yeah. You probably wouldn't mind.
Well, I'll read a couple of sentences. Under appearance, it says, hazy, often opaque clarity should not be cloudy or murky. And then under comments, it says, heavy examples suggestive of milkshakes or fruit smoothies are beyond this range. IPAs should always be drinkable. Haziness comes from the dry hopping regime, not suspended yeast, starch haze, set pectins, or other techniques. So that backs up what you're saying. And a word that I hear a lot in connection with this style is biotransformation. Is that what's going on in the beer to cause that haze?
I would have to say no. Um, biotransformation and uh, biotransformation refers to hop glycosides, which are compounds, estery type compounds, aroma compounds that are bonded to sugars. And the idea is that during fermentation, some of these hop compounds that are bound to sugars are broken apart by the yeast. And that is known to occur in a couple of wine strains, and it's known to occur in a couple of, I want to say Brettanomyces strains. It has not been proven to occur with ale yeast strains. And I don't believe it has been proven to occur with most or all of the lager yeast strains. And I was just talking about this yesterday with Professor Tom Shellhammer at Oregon State University, and I said, I was asking him, as in my role as publications director for the MBAA, to write an article, a short review article on hop glycosides, kind of where are we right now. And he's buried at the moment. So he had to put it off. But where are we with hop glycoside science? What have we determined? And he agreed that, yes, it has not been proven yet. In fact, there have been a couple of studies that, failed to demonstrate it. And I asked him at one point, I said, what yeast did you use? He goes, USO5. And it's like, rats. Okay. Cal ale, Cal ale type yeast, so, the one yeast strain that most everybody uses for brewing IPAs, doesn't do anything with hop glycosides. So, that I would say that we're still researching biotransformation, and there may be some mechanism, but so far we've been able to prove several scenarios where it doesn't work. So, grain of salt going forward and all that.
So is there any kind of biotransformation happening in the fermentation, like between hops and other stuff, or is this just kind of, supposition talk?
To the best of my knowledge, there is not.
Okay. Well, let's talk about how these beers are made. First of all, just let's start with the basics. What do you put in the grain bill?
Okay. Well, I think one aspect of the flavor, the body, and the mouthfeel of the beer is the use of wheat and oat adjuncts. Or they can be malts as well, but these are typically not 100% barley beers. Usually, in my own recipe, I like to use both wheat and oats, kind of a 2-to-1 wheat to oat addition, for about 20-25% of the grain bill. Just throw a little extra protein in there. Proteins to enhance the fullness of the mouthfeel. To bind with the polyphenols and create the haze that people use to identify the style. So you have a base malt plus pale adjuncts. Caramel malt flavors are highly discouraged in terms of the people that make that talk about the style and make the style. Caramel is considered a flaw, so no dark specialty malts or like caramel 60 and above. Some caramel 10, some caramel 20 certainly doesn't hurt. This style is known for some residual sweetness, but I think really that comes more from a shift in the malt hop balance, where we're moving all the hop additions or majority of the hop additions to after the boil, really cutting back on the IBUs. So the residual sweetness that people talk about with this style is not, under attenuation. It's not high, it's not coming from residual caramel sugars. It's coming from backing off on the bitterness, really. So, and let's talk about the hop schedule. In our quests to improve hop aroma and flavor of IPAs, the hop additions are moved towards the end of the boil and after the boil. Lots of dry hopping, and so you're getting a lot more hop oil into the beer, and therefore a really intense hop aroma. A lot of these hops are being added to the whirlpool, or that is, that's at the commercial level. On the homebrewing level, you simply at the end of the boil turn the burner off, and then add hops and let them hot steep for anywhere from 20 to 60 minutes, whatever your pleasure may be. That during that hot steeping time, depending on your temperature, some isomerization is occurring. And you are getting some bitterness, but you're also not boiling off a lot of these hop oils and and flavor that you tend to retain. I should mention isomerization curves. I published a paper in NBAA, 6 months ago or so, where I used one of Malowicki and Shellhammer's papers where they had modeled isomerization, as a function of temperature. And so extrapolating their paper to boiling temperature, you get some numbers that from 212 degrees boiling, being 100% isomerization rate, down to 200 degrees, down to 190 degrees, isomerization falls off pretty quick. So by the time you get down to kind of a hot steeping after the boil temperature of 180, 190 degrees Fahrenheit, you're down to about 15% isomerization compared to the boil.
So there's time. So there's still isomerization. There's still bitterness being pulled out of the hops at say 180 degrees Fahrenheit. And for our metric friends, it'll be around 82 C.
Yes, right. Yeah, around 80 degrees C. You're getting only about 15% of the isomerization that you get at boiling temperatures.
And this is one place where commercial breweries and home brewers, this is our process differs a bit because, if you're in the whirlpool and you've got 20 barrels of wort, and you turn off the burners, you're going to hold the temperature longer than if you've got 5 gallons. So that's where recipes can be sort of tricky to translate from one to the other. So if you're a home brewer, and most of us are, what's the best strategy for getting juicy hop flavors after the boil? I mean, what should we do?
Well, I think it's simply lots of hops hot steeped for a period of time. You can use recipe software such as Beersmith and others that will model, how much isomerization you're getting at cooler temperatures, after the boil, and still, use those numbers and those models to say, okay, I'm shooting for 30 IBUs, 35 IBUs, and that's enough bitterness to balance the beer. It's not going to be as intense as regular IPA if you move all your hops to after the boil, but you still will get enough bitterness to balance the beer and have that balance. I in my own recipes, for example, I brewed, I think the gravity is around 1050, 1055, something like that. I did 4 ounces of hops, a variety of Cascade, Centennial, Amarillo, and so on. I steeped it after the boil for 30 minutes and then followed that up with another 4 ounces dry hopping. And my recipe software calculations predicted like 35 IBUs. In tasting the beer, I think it tastes more like 25. But it was still enough bitterness to not be unbalanced. And I was frankly surprised. My first attempt at a recipe for NEIPA or Hazy Hop Forward Ale, at how much I liked the beer, how drinkable it was. It was a very thirst quenching, refreshing beer. Lots of hop aroma and flavor, juice like, some tropical fruit. I used Galaxy and Amarillo and Y2Aka and the Centennial, I think, or something like that. Anyway, I forget the exact hop bill, but I had a lot of those tropical hops in there. And it had very nice tropical fruit flavor and aroma. And with a slight residual sweetness. Again, not because I added caramel malts or didn't attenuate it thoroughly, but because, in terms of the gravity of the beer, around 1055, and to the bitterness of the beer, and all of the hops being at the end, it had, or it didn't completely obliterate the malt sweetness that and not so many of the IPAs currently do.
One strategy that I've been doing lately, playing with a lot, is doing a hop stand, after the boil, chilling down the wort moderately to 180 degrees Fahrenheit, and then holding it there with my electric brewing system.
Nice.
And, holding it there for, say, 15 minutes and then adding hops at that point. And that way I can kind of standardize, no matter what the weather is out on the patio, I can kind of standardize what the recipe is so that I could duplicate it. So, I guess it depends on your system and what the temperature is, ambient and all that, as far as, how fast your temperature falls in your brew kettle.
Right. And that's what I mean by hot steep, too, is a hop stand where you are, in your case, you actively cooled it down to a particular temperature. I think in my case, I simply just turned off the burner and let it, slowly cool down during a half an hour steep. I think the lowest temperature it got to after the half hour is about 170 degrees Fahrenheit, or 68 Celsius, 70 Celsius, somewhere in there. It accomplishes much the same thing. There is talk of, on the forums and so on, of choosing particular temperatures to I guess, what do you say, target different hop oils and so on. And my view of hop science and hop oil interaction is, I'm going to say that, it's not a bad idea, but to some extent you're spitting in the wind. There's a lot going on. So I think I haven't seen enough data to say that trying to target a particular temperature to hold at a hop stand is significantly better, or, something like that, versus simply letting it, naturally cool down or not cool down after turning the heat off.
And I usually do a standard, basic bittering charge, at the start of the boil, so I'm not worried about extracting bitterness. Whereas if I were to do all the hop additions after the boil, it would seem to be, to me, that you would want to start at boiling temperature, essentially, and then let it fall off
Yeah.
So that you make sure that you get a good bittering.
Yeah, and that's what I did. I just simply turned off the burner and added my hops and let it go, and it gradually lowered in temperature. I think, and let's go back to the trying to define the style too. I think this is as this class of beers evolves. I think this is another characteristic where the predominant hop schedule is all whirlpool hopping and dry hopping, maybe some bittering addition at the beginning of the boil, but usually everything's at the end. And so, as a class, these beers aren't as bitter as IPAs. Certainly, I mean, they can be brewed that way. You can do, 1 or 2 ounce charge at 60 minutes and get some good solid bitterness going in the beer. But the samples that I've had at different brew pubs around the country and in South America, people are tending to go to less bitter versions, simply because that way it appeals to greater section of the public that aren't bitter hopheads like the rest of us. So we're getting a very hop oriented beer that's not excruciatingly bitter. Therefore, you're tasting some more residual sweetness, or some not residual sweetness, but you're tasting more of the malt backbone of the malts, and that sweetness in combination with the esters and the hop flavors and the mouthfeel, a softer, sweeter mouthfeel, fuller mouthfeel, gives it that juicy character that people talk about.
And what's the approach to water chemistry?
Good question. Well, water chemistry, classic IPAs, Burton Pale Ales, etc., you're talking about high sulfate concentrations in the water. And when I say high, I mean like 200 ppm kind of thing. That amount of sulfate in the water dries out the beer. It makes the hop character of a traditional IPA very assertive and punchy, it's very bitter on the tongue right up front. And then because that beer is dry, that bitterness fades fairly quickly and you're ready to take another sip. If you brew a very hoppy beer, with high chloride instead of high sulfate, that bitterness tends to stay on the tongue longer. The malt character is more dominant, and that's essentially what we're doing with these beers. Is we're trading the sulfate for chloride to accentuate the maltiness and the sweetness and fullness of the malt character of the beer, and not the sharpness and assertiveness of the hop. The hops. The hop bitterness, again, because the hops are being added later in the brew, there's not as much backbone bitterness to the beer. So this combination of chloride and late hopping, again, gives it that more of a juicy character, hop juice, if you will, as opposed to straight up hop bitterness.
And about yeast, there's talk of people choosing less attenuative or less flocculent, rather, yeasts because they want to encourage the haze in the beer. What do you think of that choice, or what choices should we be making when we're thinking about yeasts for these NEIPAs?
Yeah. In my opinion, I think that an English ale yeast, with a nice malty, estery profile works best. Something that complements the hop aromas. You get some fruity esters. You don't want if you're going to back off on the hop bitterness by doing all late additions, then you don't want to add, low attenuation to that stack necessarily. The beer, a low hopped, fully attenuated beer will still have a fair amount of residual sweetness to it. And that's where I think that the sweetness aspect of this style is coming from, is in other words, the beer should be fully attenuated, not low attenuated, but it can be like a medium attenuation yeast. Attenuation, flocculation are kind of opposites of each other, in terms of yeast strain character. A low attenuating yeast tends to be a highly flocculent yeast. In other words, the yeast ferments and then finishes fermentation and flocculates and drops down and hibernates quickly, leaving more residual sugar behind. Whereas a less flocculent yeast tends to stay in suspension, tends to eat longer, and tends to produce a little drier beer. If people trying to choose less flocculent yeasts looking for haze, they are producing fully attenuated beers, and they're saying, okay, I'm getting yeast haze. Well, maybe, but that haze should actually be coming from the hops, hop polyphenols and protein, not yeast haze. Even a low attenuating yeast, with the good fermentation should settle out.
And one benefit of, one drawback of brewing with depending on yeast haze to be your right. source of the haziness, is that it goes away after the yeast does flocculate out eventually. So you send out a product and it changes over time. Right.
Yeah, that's very true. And even Hefeweizens, well, they say Hefeweizens, they got to be drank young for that very reason. I mean, that so much of the fresh beer character of Hefeweizen comes from having that yeast in suspension, and as soon as that starts dropping out, then a lot of those flavors oxidize and disappear.
Are we going to see instructions on bottles of NEIPAs from some breweries that say rouse the yeast off the bottom as you would a Hefeweizen?
I hope not. That would be very misguided, I think. I do know that at some of the conferences I've talked with several brewers that have asked questions at presentations on how to maintain the haze of their NEIPAs, because customer perception says these beers should be cloudy, and my beer doesn't seem to be cloudy enough, after a couple weeks on the tap, questions like that. And it should be a hop polyphenol protein haze, not a yeast haze, and that should stick around. But again, a lot of brewers are used to fining their beers, filtering their beers, centrifuging their beers, and that's going to cut back on that haze quite a bit.
And protein haze, it eventually settles out too, right?
Yeah, time and temperature. The colder you keep the beer for a longer period of time, that those proteins and react with the polyphenols and they combine and they agglomerate, and gradually they get enough mass to settle out. So the haze will gradually disappear.
So have I missed any points on how to brew these beers?
Oh, one point I wanted to mention was that when I brewed my own NEIPA, or hazy hop forward IPA, whatever you call these things, Swain, that's it, style without an interesting name. I consider myself a fairly proficient brewer, and I started out with an OG of about 1055, and my final gravity was only about 1022.
Oh my!
And I was a bit flabbergasted by that. But I tasted it, and it's like, well, it doesn't taste like 1022. Tastes fine. And of course, the beer was hazy. Then I brewed the same recipe with our Narcosa brewery down in Porto Alegre, Brazil, last month, or about 5 weeks ago now. And he had the same finding, that his finishing gravity was in the 20s, and he was all set to whip up, another batch of yeast and pitch to it. And I said, no, that matches my findings. Leave it alone. It should be fine. And sure enough, he let it just sit for another, I think, few days to carbonate, and then tried it. And he said, yeah, this is a great beer. And I ran an experiment with cornstarch mixed in cold water, put the hydrometer in, and got a hydrometer reading of simply cornstarch and water of 1010. I let that hydrometer sit in that hydrometer jar for about an hour and came back. The cornstarch had settled to the bottom, and now the gravity read 1.000. So suspended solids do influence your hydrometer readings. And I think in the case of these hazy beers, you're going to see that. Whether it's, protein polyphenol haze or yeast haze or simply trub, these suspended solids will affect your readings. Now, I don't know in my own case, with my beer, what that difference was. I suppose I should go pour a glass out of the keg and measure it again and see if it's changed. But or filter it or something to try to take that factor out. But, there is an effect of suspended solids affecting your hydrometer reading.
Now, if you can't get an accurate reading with your hydrometer, could you use your refractometer and use the compensation formula to make sure that your fermentation is finished? Would that be a good idea?
Yeah, I think that would work better. Refractometers aren't really affected by the solids. They're going off refractive index, which hopefully is primarily affected by the residual sugar concentration and the alcohol concentration. So the suspended solids, kind of probably decrease the light transmittance through the sample, make it a little bit harder to read. But yeah, you should get a fairly reasonable compensatable number from a refractometer to let you know if your fermentation is finished. But honestly, use your taste. Taste the beer. It should taste finished. There should not be a lot of, sweetness, candy sweetness that you can definitely taste from an under attenuated beer. And
if you are using your refractometer after fermentation, be sure and use a formula like Sean Terrell has one on his website that compensates for the alcohol, because the alcohol will skew the results of your refractometer reading.
Yes, exactly.
Now, I took a big risk, John Palmer. And when you had texted me several weeks ago, first talking about this, I had brewed a 15-minute all-grain hop stand smash pale ale that I thought, it came out cloudy, and at that point the hop character was really juicy. I just used Two Row and Cascade, and I said, boy, this kind of reminds me of what my perception of a New England IPA is like. So so I sent you a couple of bottles. And it's a bold move. It's the first homebrew of mine that you've ever tasted, I believe.
But I'm enjoying it, yeah.
Well, good.
Now, I'm drinking the second bottle right now and almost finished with it. But it does have that pale yellow malt color. It has substantial haze. You can't see through to the other side of the glass. If you put your finger on the back side of the glass, you can't see it. It is not milky. It is just simply, hazy. You can't really see through it. It does have a nice hop flavor, and I think it's for a smash beer. It is NEIPA like, and from what you've told me on the brewing process, the short boil and late hop additions. I think you've really hit the essence of the brewing process and that gives rise to this style of beer.
So should we consider a short boil of an all grain wort to be one way that you could get more protein haze into the beer and kind of contribute to the style?
Yeah, that I think that's certainly one way to approach it. I think, the hot break typically occurs 10 to 15, 20 minutes into the boil. So if you were to boil simply until the hot break occurred, then cool, or, turn off the heat, add your after boil hops, and then chill and ferment and dry hop. I think that is very much in the NEIPA style. The haze, again, as we've been talking about, it should come from not boiling the hops, resulting in lots of polyphenol still being in solution with the protein that agglomerates and then forms the haze.
Now, let me get into the details of the recipe real quick for those who haven't heard me go on and on about it on the show. And, and we did shoot a video episode. I don't know if it'll be out by the time you hear this or not, but it's a 2-gallon batch. I used 4 pounds or 1.8 kilograms of two-row. I mashed at 150 degrees for 60 minutes. I only boiled for 15 minutes. At the beginning of that 15-minute boil, I added 1 ounce or 28 grams of Cascade, and then I cooled down to 180 degrees Fahrenheit after that 15 minutes, added 2 ounces or 56 grams of Cascade, held that at 15 minutes, and then chilled as normal and pitched USO5. So starting gravity 1055, final gravity 1010. Now, when I first drank this beer, it was really grapefruity. I described it as grapefruit candy, and it has evolved a little bit, and the hop character has faded. And in one of the documents that you sent me, you talked about how to preserve the hop flavor in your beer. Now that you've gone to all this work and, all this money to put all these hops in your beer and you've got all this delicious hop flavor and aroma, what are the strategies that we can use to preserve that?
Well, yeah, hop flavor and aroma suffer greatly from oxidation. So everything you can do to slow oxidation, and that can help. And that means eliminating oxygen from the package, purging the headspace of the bottles or kegs, capping on foam, those sort of practices. Also, temperature is just critical. It is the number one factor for slowing reactions. So after you've carbonated the beer, chill the beer and store it cold if you want to preserve that hop, aroma and flavor. Storing them warm is going to allow those oxidation reactions to occur much, much faster.
Yeah, I think one of my mistakes in this was that after it was carbonated, after I left it a week or so at room temperature to bottle condition, I left it at that room temperature because I didn't have room in the fridge. Right, so yeah. I think, at that point, I tasted the beer, was like, man, this is really good. And now it's been in the bottle, for a little over a month, and, it's not as good. So I think, I think cooling it or keeping it cool would have helped me out on that.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Well, John, this is the last chance. Did I miss anything? Are we missing any important points that we should tell people? Any advice for people who are really creating this style as we go along?
I would say don't use Mosaic simply because I hate that hop. Be kind to John Palmer when he comes to drink your beer. Don't have Mosaic in it.
What was the descriptor that you call Mosaic?
Oh, it's rotting fruit in the orchard to me. I mean, there's this overripeness and character that that's how it tastes to me. I love a lot of the other, Pacific variety hops, New Zealand hops, and so on. But Mosaic with that heavy mango, overripe mango character, I just don't like.
Some people, the Mosaic fans out there, finally have a reason to dislike you, John.
Yes. Yeah. It's nobody's perfect, self-included. I was up in the Sacramento area over New Year's and got together with Jen Talley, and we went around a couple of the local brew pubs in the Auburn area, Moonraker and Knee Deep and Auburn Ale House, and we tried a lot of the current NEIPA interpretations. I mean, again, I think something more like hazy hop forward or hop juice ales is probably a little more descriptive than NEIPA, because they're not, at least in my travels, I see these beers moving away from a classic IP bitterness. We're talking more like 20 to 40 IBUs, rather, more of a pale ale hopping and bitterness level than the 60 IBU bitterness level for an IPA. But I tried several varieties, several different interpretations, and universally hazy, universally hop forward, juicy, tense, tropical, fruity aromas, very drinkable beers. But again, I think as more people try them and the brewers adapt the recipes to their customers, I think we're seeing the bitterness level of this class of beer come down a bit more to the pale ale level than the IPA level.
Well, we had discussions over the past few years about wanting to change the name of the West Coast IPAs because they're not really IPAs. So now we have a style that's kind of an offshoot of even that. It's still using the term IPA. So it means even less. But it's a name, and if ask KFC if
exactly, yes.
Ask DQ and KFC if you can get away, if you can establish an identity just off of letters. So well, this has been fun. I always appreciate your coming on. You've got the new edition of your book is out, and people can find you on the Brewing Network. And you're always at events all around the country and around the world, and you'll be at HomebrewCon, I'm guessing.
Oh, yes, I'll definitely be there.
Awesome.
Looking forward to that.
Yeah, look forward to seeing you. Appreciate it, John.
Oh, my pleasure, James.
Well, thanks again to John. I have to be honest, off mic, John said that there might have been a flaw in my beer because of the carbonation level. He suspects that there might have been a wild yeast in there somewhere. So it figures, right? But the beer tasted good, he said. So there is that. Thanks to John for being nice about it on mic. But, it figures. I send John Palmer a flawed beer. Oh, well, if you have... drink them fresh. If you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to james@basicbrewing.com, or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com, and please don't forget to tell us where you're from. Thanks to everybody supporting us through our Patreon page. Special goodies coming your way, early releases and such as that, recipes and such. Check all that out at patreon.com/basicbrewing. Be sure to check out our DVDs, Extract Brewing and Partial Mashing, Stepping into All Grain, Low-Tech Lagering and Decoction Mashing, and Introduction to Wine Kits. You can find them all on our site. Get a free Basic Brewing bottle opener with any DVD combo. And you can check out our Basic Brewing shirts in the store, too, as well as our logbooks, where you can track and log up to 50 batches of beer. And when I remember, every order gets some stickers, some Basic Brewing stickers. And if you get an order from me and you don't have the stickers, let me know, because I have forgotten in the past, and I'll just stick those in an envelope and get them out to you. Getting old. You check all that stuff out at basicbrewingshop.com. And don't forget you can join the American Homebrewers Association and subscribe to Brew Your Own magazine through the associate links on basicbrewing.com. That's all until next time. Until then, thanks for listening, everybody. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dotson. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voice, and we'll talk to you next time, everybody. So long.